A few days ago, we had Aileen Williamson on, who was talking about sustainability and her role as a consultant in the UK and trying to get hotels to understand where there are some low-hanging fruit opportunities. And today, we are really lucky to have somebody who I've known for 20 years, Tristan Jahme, who is the general manager of the award-winning Manta Rays Ningaloo Beach Resort in Exmouth, Australia. Tristan has tremendous experience across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and he's got a really sort of interesting global perspective to this sustainability subject, especially working in remote destination hospitality locations. So, Tristan, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Richard.
And before we dive into sustainability, Tristan, can you give the listeners a brief overview of your career, and then talk a little bit about how Manta Rays fits into this sort of unique marine remote location type of career that you seem to have uh, niche carved out for yourself? I think that would be a good introduction.
Great. Thank you, Richard. So, my career started off in the UK, doing two degrees at university in the UK, being international hospitality management and then also adventure leisure management. It then saw me start out more in your larger city business hotels with Shangri-La, worked with them in China and also in the Philippines. And then beyond that, it stemmed out to Australia, where I then started working in more niche boutique remote luxury lodges and remote luxury resorts. So I've been really fortunate enough in Australia to have worked in every state in Australia, inland, sensitive inland environments, remote coastal environments,
Hmm.
and even in recently down in the southwest within operating vineyard environments, and currently now to the northwest, where we're in a really sensitive World Heritage listed Cape Range National Park.
Incredible. So, how many of these different properties have you actually been managing to date so far?
Within these properties, five of
Yeah.
them. So that would
Five.
include Alquestro up in the Kimberley, which is on a station in the Kimberley, remote
Mm.
station. Bamaru Plains, which is also on a remote wetland environment in the Northern Territory. Cape Lodge, which is in the winery region of Margaret River. South Salis Lodge, which is in directly in and on the reef or fringe reef of the Cape Range National Park.
Mm.
Manta Rays Ningaloo Beach Resort, where I am currently just outside the Cape Range National Park.
Amazing. So, one would imagine that your guests are sort of drawn to these types of locations and experiences for specific reasons. I mean, in that sense, can you tell us a little bit about what it is about Ningaloo Reef that is the key selling point, and whether guests would expect that a place like that is obviously preserving natural environment and things like that would be super conscious of sustainable practices. So maybe you could just give us a little bit about some of the key um, elements of this particular resort, and what's the key marketing that draws customers to your facility.
So the Ningaloo Reef is the longest fringe reef in the world,
Hmm.
and it's unlike the Great Barrier Reef where you've got to travel hours via boat to access it. The Ningaloo Reef is actually accessible directly off the land. So it does create a really unique opportunity in terms of access. Because of that access, we've obviously got to be a lot more sensitive in terms of not only how we travel to these destinations, but how we operate being so close to this fringe reef itself as well. But one of the biggest attractions, particularly this time of year, to the Ningaloo Reef is the opportunity to be able to swim with the whale sharks, and
Wow,
that attracts its largest number of tourists in the year.
that's amazing. The whale sharks come in. Are they en route to breeding, or are they going to? They're passing through, or why are they drawn to that particular location?
So it's still very little is really known with their movement patterns, but what
Mm.
has been identified is where we get our warm and cold current meeting each other here is drawing and welling up all the food for these whale sharks where they congregate. So they mainly start congregating here in conjunction where these currents start drawing in all the food for them at
Yeah.
around sort of mid-March. And that sort
Okay.
of takes them through all the way to about August. But there's still a lot of research being conducted as to where they're coming from and where they're going. And unfortunately, being a fish compared to a whale itself, they don't have to come up for air. So all tracking devices actually haven't been really fruitful in identifying their exact
Mm.
movement patterns yet. So
Okay.
there's still quite a mystery with them.
Great. Well, presumably, when you talk about the sensitivity of the ecology and things like that, I would imagine that the whole um, sustainability sort of eco structure of the facility, whether you're talking about kitchens or waste or sewage and all that. I mean, presumably that has to be very, very carefully planned in the original building of the resort. Can you tell us what are some of the key sustainability challenges that are really unique to your new property that you've just taken over?
Sure, I'd say the biggest challenge we have is the remoteness and the
Mm.
accessibility to some of that technology.
Yeah.
So, a classic example would be, in your urban environments, there is access to electric vehicle charging stations. There is
Mm.
access to recycling facilities, for
Mm.
example. Obviously, the more remote we get, we are approximately nearly 1,300 kilometers north of Perth. And
Wow.
so there's very few electric vehicles
Mm.
operating within this environment. And not only does that pose challenges logistically, but even with our recycling, we are still very, very far behind with regard to recycling
Yeah.
here. We only actually started recycling our aluminium cans only a few years ago. So the sourcing and access to a lot of this basic, what we'd consider basic infrastructure, is still very hard to access in these small
Okay.
remote towns.
Okay. So do you have any, I mean, you talked to me earlier a little bit before we started about the sort of rebranding and looking at the DNA of the Manta Rays Resort. So are you going to try and incorporate some sustainability goals, or are there areas like, what we talked about earlier, where there are some opportunities now of how tech could be brought into it as even in a facility as remote as yours, like with the uniforms and things like that. I mean, is there anything that you've seen that has inspired you to sort of focus on environmental responsibility, or any goals that you think would be low hanging fruit that you see an opportunity to kick this off?
Yes, so I mean, probably 2 years ago, we introduced solar power to the property.
Okay.
Um, we are obviously now recycling cans, which is great ever since that facility was put in about 2 years ago.
Hmm.
My first initial target that we would be looking at is putting in water dispensers, filtered water dispensers into the resort. Currently, they
Okay.
are still single use plastic bottles. So, as
Mm.
soon as we can implement these water dispensers, which are arriving in about 3 weeks' time, that will phase out all the single use plastic water bottles that are currently going in the rooms as well. Just for feasibility for transport, we are looking to introduce electric bicycles to the resort as well. which will allow the guests to access the town more sustainably than using their own vehicles. The town's probably 3 kilometers away. So,
Right.
again, with some of the temperatures we get here at the resort in the summer, where we're sort of mid 40 degrees Celsius, the electric bikes would make it more feasible than asking them to walk and or cycle in those temperatures or use their vehicles.
Yeah, those are some really practical ideas. And in terms of things like energy use and water, that type of thing, where do you get the fresh water from? Where does that come from? Where's the main power plant that do you have your own generator, or does it come from the town, or what?
Sure. So all the water for this town is all sourced from the local aquifer in town. There is immense pressure on this aquifer to the point that the town's identified at the moment it could probably only support or facilitate 10 new houses to be built a year at the
Mm,
moment.
okay.
So we're really on the cusp of actually meeting our capacity to further growth in this town, unless we start really introducing better water reuse or water saving techniques.
Right. And are there any, is there a local school there that your resort could help to support, or their local, presumably a lot of the employees there are from the township, or are they from other locations? Where are most of your team from? And are there opportunities for partnerships within the community of the town where manta rays could sort of engage with them and help to promote sustainability efforts, or that type of thing?
Absolutely. There's always a great amount of potential for us to be more involved in community programs. So,
Mm.
and with regards to our employers, majority of our employers currently are transient employers working through the region. They would be on working holiday visas.
Okay.
So, being so remote in this region, we do rely very heavily on our working holiday makers coming through the region.
Right.
Again, being one of these remote destinations, there is a government grant whereby these employees on these visas are able to complete their remote work or farm work, their 90-day, 88-day work on their visas.
Okay.
And by working within this region, that qualifies them for their remote work that they're required to get an extension on their visa, for their second year visa.
Mm.
With regard to community involvement, so one of the initiatives that we've got involved in with the community is what they call the Containers for Change. This
Right.
Containers for Change is effectively a recycling program whereby any of our bottles that bear a 10-cent refund sign on it, or a can that's eligible to be recycled, we put these in these Containers for Change bins, and we generate a refund for these recycled materials. To date, the resort's actually earned $15,000 from this program. And what we've done with this is donated this directly into the community. And
Sure.
this money is then being donated back into the community for various school programs, school sporting programs, and even outreach to some of the elderly in the community as well. So there's some amazing community programs that we can be involved in. And,
That's
even particularly for the school, there are opportunities to introduce water fountains, water dispensers for
that's
the
great.
children there as well.
Right. Amazing. With regard to all your food, and food and beverage, presumably there's nothing grown there. I would imagine. Is everything imported? And how difficult is it to get? I mean, I guess one thing is you'd have to plan well ahead so that you're not going to run out of stuff. So logistics is very important, especially with weather and things like that. Where does all your food, in this remote area, where does it all come from? And is there anything local?
Great. Yes. So Richard, with regards to climate, that's obviously the first thing that dictates, what we can grow as such. So Exmouth is an extremely arid environment, so we get less than 250 mils of rainfall a year. So we're considered as dry as a desert. So
Wow.
unfortunately, growing our own produce here really isn't a sustainable option as such. We could
Mm,
probably grow it, but the amount of water would need to generate to be able to irrigate our own
mm.
food would be probably counterproductive. But in terms of what we do source local, we're very fortunate to obviously have a bountiful ocean, and we source the majority, if not all, of our seafood locally from our local fish supplier. And we obviously choose very carefully with all our suppliers. And we're also fortunate enough that our fish supply is sustainable and it's line caught as well, which to us is incredibly important. But otherwise, the bulk of our produce is being sourced from nearby Carnarvon, which is one of the largest fresh produce producing areas, and that's roughly 400 kilometers south of us. And if we can't source fresh produce from them, it is trucked up from Perth, which is again roughly 1,300 kilometers south of us.
Right. Oh, that's tremendous. Yeah, I think that, well, the seafood must be incredible. I mean, I remember when I worked in the BVI many years ago, there was a problem with reef fish, something called ciguatera, which could cause some nerve. In fact, I got it myself. I ended up in a hospital in Puerto Rico because I'd eaten some reef fish, and it's a toxin that affects your neurological system. Do you have to be very selective about the type of fish that you're catching, or can you eat? I mean, is it more the sort of deeper sea fish that you use? And I mean, what about shellfish? Can you get conch and things like that?
Sure, we're really lucky. Ciguatera is really only an issue that's experienced on the east coast of Australia.
Okay,
And I believe that has been more commonly associated with the various activities on the east coast being a busier coastline compared to us.
right.
They've got a lot more runoff of chemicals going back into the ocean from farming practices, as well as much larger amounts of shipping traffic in their
Mm,
oceans. So fortunately for us, our oceans on this side are a lot more pristine in condition, and we don't have challenges with ciguatera. But in terms of where we're sourcing our fish, it's predominantly sort of medium dwelling based, so anywhere from 40 meters of water to about 200 meters of water, line caught.
right,
Shellfish wise, we are able to source prawns locally from our prawn trawlers here, as
right.
well as Exmouth bugs, which is effectively your slipper lobster, but more
Okay,
commonly known as the Exmouth bug.
tremendous. That's brilliant. Moving on to thinking about, the fact that you've got, I know in our industry, and there's been a lot of talk recently in the fashion industry about waste coming from, um, you know, fabrics and from clothing that is not sold and then ending up in landfills. And, a lot of brands are reluctant to sort of sell it off because obviously it would diminish the value of their brand. And it's now raised some issues regarding more interest in textiles and fabrics within the hotel industry. So there's a lot of towels, there's a lot of bathrobes, there's a lot of sheets and pillowcases and that type of thing. But of course, one of the areas is uniforms. And I remember and you will remember with the Shangri-La where there were so many, you might have 8 or 10 different departments. Every outlet had its own uniform, and the way that it was managed was that most of the time the outlet manager would do a little bit of tweaking here, a little bit there. Or if you wanted a new concept, you'd have to bring in an interior designer or a uniform designer, I should say, to redesign the uniform. There's a cost involved. And then quite often, I remember in many instances, even at Hotel Icon, where we had two different uniform designers. One of them had specified some particular brocade type of fabric, which after a year was no longer available. So now I think that there are many hotels that are now approaching sustainability in uniforms and considering the use of innovative technology to manufacture fabrics that are made from things like bamboo or corn or hemp or plastic recycled bottles. So I just wondered whether you, with your kind of creative, innovative thinking, um, would be interested in exploring something like that, where they're using AI and innovative technology to sort of optimize the textile supply chain and reduce waste in hotel uniforms. Because one of the things that they do also is that then they recycle. They actually can turn these old uniforms that you've got into, say, school uniforms, which you could then donate to a local school and that type of thing. So I just wondered whether you had any thoughts about this area.
Thank you, Richard. It's obviously really timely you bring this up because we are currently looking at a full refit for all our uniforms in the property, for all the departments too. And there's obviously certain sort of guidelines for us anyway. So, for example, for our maintenance department, just given how hot it is in this climate, for me, the most important sort of aspect for the maintenance department is sun protection. That the clothes
Mm,
that they would be wearing would have an aspect of UV proofing, particularly in the summer periods where temperatures are going sort of above 45 degrees Celsius.
right.
For the housekeeping department, it's obviously the physical demands that they're placed under, that their uniforms are comfortable, obviously hard wearing, and then same for our food and beverage staff too. And I think also another good thing to add is not only it being eco friendly and long lasting, but also ethically sourced as well. That's
Yes.
a really important part for us to ensure is that the people behind the manufacturing process, there's also ethical treatment there from the very beginning of the supply
Yeah.
chain too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think what I found interesting was that they're even that they can actually apply a UV coating to their fabrics, and also they showed me recently a chef's jacket that was completely fire retardant, and another one that had this BioNTech antibacteria virus. So housekeeping staff who are cleaning, toilets and having their hand going and arms going into bins and things like that. They're handling a lot of waste and garbage and stuff. This is actually something that they can also build into the product, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I think what I like about it is this sort of closed loop supply chain, so that your employees can actually, especially in a remote location like where you are, if you've got a new staff coming on board, you don't have to go through the whole process of measuring them up and all that kind of thing, and then trying to get it made by a local tailor and all that. I mean, it's all then procured directly, so it's pretty cool. I'll be happy to send you some more information about it, and I think that they might even be open to do a sort of collaboration, maybe where they could give you a few chef's jackets to test, and then you could film them in operation, show how the see if the staff like them, because they're very good in terms of being in cool weather, according to my the feedback I've had some from other people. So that's great. I mean, I'm pleased that you're open to innovations like that. That sounds interesting. Does that sound like something that you would be willing to experiment with?
Yeah, great, absolutely. I've certainly not come across any AI designed sort of
Mm.
uniforms in Australia yet. So, I mean, if we can be on the forefront of something like that, that'd be really great to explore.
Yeah, I think they're also looking at things like bed sheets and toweling products made from recycled materials. So that's also quite interesting. So looking ahead, Tristan, in terms of innovation and future sustainability in the industry per se, I mean, you've had the fortunate opportunity to work in large, I mean, Shangri-La's are huge, large corporate hotels, and also these, from one extreme to the other. Where do you see technology or innovations going, and what are you most excited about in the sort of not just the sustainability place, but space, but even AI and how it could be harnessed for hotel industry, whether it's for marketing, big data, helping you to crunch. information that could help you to promote your resort. Any thoughts on that?
I'm incredibly excited just to see not only what it can do, but just how fast it's moving, Richard. And I think that's really what excites me about AI is the pace at which it's generating change. I do think previously um, we haven't been dynamic enough to actually make the required change. And I really think that AI can actually speed up the process of what's required of us to be a lot more responsible and to be a
Mm,
lot more environmentally sensitive, and perhaps even to maybe even educate us better. Because I think it's all great to be able to have access to this, but we still need to be educated on it, and that will hopefully shift the mindset because there's going to be no change unless we actually have a shift in the mindset.
yeah. And I think also you've got the issue with owners and wanting to invest, because I remember, even with Shangri-La, and you and I will know because we work there, but um, an idea that might seem technologically advanced, or an asset, if you're trying to roll it out over, 100 properties, it just doesn't become feasible.
No,
I think.
and even trying to get that consistent is incredibly difficult when
Mm,
it's over such a large scale as well.
yeah, yeah. I was just wondering if you were to explain briefly how you would sort of position your hotel to somebody. Let's say you were at a conference or a show, and you were explaining your degree of luxury. Let's say, is it sort of more casual, like a friend at the beach? Is it something that's very premium? I mean, how do you sell the manta rays in terms of being a luxury, or a budget, or how do you, are there any adjectives that you use, or descriptors to position your property?
Sure, I would say it's authentically Australian hospitality.
Okay.
As you know, Shangri La they're probably described as probably
Asian
more,
hospitality.
yeah,
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
Asian
Yeah.
hospitality. And I think for anywhere where you are, you really need to be authentic to place. And
Mm,
I think where we are is just coming straight from the heart. It's not hospitality that we train, that everyone speaks robotically to the same SOP, to the same training. What we want is to bring out the unique individual characters of every single staff person. I
mm,
believe all our staff are incredibly unique, talented individuals, and I'd rather them have the authenticity in their service, that it is attentive, it is personable, but it's certainly not being trained out in SOPs that everyone's saying exactly the same words, the same lines, and it's
yeah.
then becoming robotic. I would rather it flow authentically from all the staff. And I think anything that comes from the heart is always going to be original and authentic.
Okay. And do you see that, your guests sort of have an expectation in terms of how carefully you do things with regard to, being sustainable, or your care, if you like, in the way that you handle materials and things, and the fact that do you think that's a marketing point? I mean, it's something that your guests would come to expect, that you could sell your resort as being environmentally conscious or whatever, or do you think that's just a kind of a passe thing that people don't really look at that? In other words, do you think sustainability is marketable as a feature of a hotel?
I think it's marketable as long as you're true to what you're doing and you're not trying to market that you are being sustainable and you're not. I
Right.
certainly think our guests would expect us to be environmentally conscious, particularly given what they're doing on their activities here. And I think not only to our guests, but I think even the locals that live here in Exmouth would also expect us to have a sense of greater responsibility for the environment we're operating in, and preserving this not only for future guests but even for future locals that have the privilege of enjoying this day to day.
Yeah. So it actually can be a bit of a differentiator from the competition. Do you have a lot of competition in your in that particular vicinity? Are there who are you competing against?
We are competing against some other smaller resorts.
Mm.
However, there is a lot more competition in the pipeline, and a lot of that's already in development. So it's only going to be a couple more years before there's a lot more larger competitors that would be of the same scope as our resort.
Mm. What would what would sort of what would interest you in terms of, like, let's say you were to sort of look at your career in 5, 10 years from now, would you ever want to go back to large corporate city hotels, or do you think that the you do you have any kind of career aspirations in terms of maybe developing your own resort one day, or how do you see your career sort of panning out?
I think having spent time in the larger corporate environments and then now moving into the more niche boutique environments, I really prefer working in the more niche boutique environments purely
Mm.
because we can be a lot more dynamic. We can manage change a lot faster. And we can also make things, in my opinion, a lot more personalized for the guests. And anything that's more personalized is probably a lot more tailored and authentic as well. So I'd certainly see myself more in the space of managing these more boutique niche operating environments where it's a one-off experience and it takes a lot of attention to detail to pull off these experiences. They're not able to be replicated on a larger corporate scale.
Yeah, I think you and I share a common feature in that sense. I mean, I having done independent hotels, I've worked in the Caribbean in small resorts and things. Although I did do corporate Shangri-La for 18 years, I was fortunate enough to be able to be reporting to individual owners, so I had direct access to them, and I was able to go and put forward an idea. And fortunately, I had the credibility because of the experience of having proven that things I could turn businesses around, or restaurants or concepts, that I was given a huge degree of freedom. And I think that is what now is lacking in many of these chain hotels, is that you're more like a caretaker in many instances. So I know where you're coming from there, and I just wondered, to what degree do you have that autonomy to make decisions, and when do you have to go to your owners or your the owner's rep to get permission to do something? I mean, do you have, like you talked about your brand positioning and you're planning to make some changes, does that all have to be presented and authorized by somebody in a head office in Sydney or something, or can you just get on with it and do it?
No, Richard, I'm really fortunate with the current structure of our owners at the moment, where it's purely flatline structure. So
Okay.
rather than going to go and get approval as such for something, it's more or less a discussion and involvement of all of us at a table, and we all have buy-in, we all have input, and it's incredibly fortunate for me to be in this position where we all have equal opinion and equal buy-in.
Well, I think that's something that's earned, though, Tristan. I mean, I think all credit to you, because that's not something that owners are just going to just hand out, ad lib. I think you have to earn that respect, and clearly you are uh, a differentiator and a disruptor yourself. I mean, I think that sort of flexibility to be able to move from different environments, different cultures. I mean, like you said, you've grown up in South Africa, you've worked in China, you've worked in Australia, you can work in a small island. I think there's a tremendous, it's a bit like when you talk about metabolic flexibility and being able to eat different things, but that you can keep your same body composition depending on whether you're in ketosis or whether you're doing a sort of high carb diet or whatever. I mean, this sort of flexibility in terms of career, and the fact that you can adapt and change is really, really key. And I think that you're a great credit to the industry in that sense. I mean, I think you could definitely mentor and share your experience with a lot of students and up and coming people in the industry. Is there anything that you would advise to somebody who was, let's say, about to graduate? And from looking back at your experience, is there anything that you would advise somebody?
I thank you, Richard. I would absolutely recommend to any of those coming out of university to find a really strong mentor and
Mm,
someone that you know you could work under for at least 10 years.
mm,
And I know these days that commitment is getting harder and harder with the workplace being a lot more transient. But if you could find yourself a mentor that you could align with and really learn from, I believe you could learn so much more from a mentor
mm.
who's there to guide you and steer you. And again, ultimately, I think the smaller companies are the ones that are a lot more dynamic, that are introducing a lot more change, and that are also giving you a lot more autonomy and a lot more freedom to exercise your skills as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I would echo that, and I think also sometimes you just get lucky that there's somebody out there who, and I've been fortunate like this, who believes that you have potential, and they're willing to take a chance with you and give you opportunities so that you can sort of push yourself. And I think that that's also quite rare because a lot of I've noticed back here in the UK, that there's a lot of protectionism of people's jobs, and somebody with experience and exposure that they see a lot of these people as even like myself as a threat. And sadly, I think that if you're in a culture, especially in Asia, I feel, and Australia, where it's a lot more dynamic and open, I think uh, it's a good environment for a young person to be able to witness change. And I think that I've just always been fortunate that someone was willing to give me a break and sort of take me under their wing, and like you say, as a mentor. So I can think of probably, let's see, probably three people in my 40 year career. And I would definitely agree with you.
Thank you, Richard. I also think there's definitely a level of commitment required on both sides, and that's not just fully relying on the mentor to give you everything.
Mm,
You've also got to commit yourself to a lot of challenges. And as you said, I'm only in the position where I'm at now purely through all the hard yards that a lot of people don't sort of notice behind the scenes,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's through experience and ultimately earning trust as well.
yeah.
No business owner is ever going to throw you all their hard-earned business and money for you to exercise any of your crazy ideas until you've proven to them that you are capable of managing their business responsibly and sustainably as well.
Yeah, I agree. How much do you think that being this sort of culturally aware approach, the fact that you've been exposed to so many different cultural environments, and the fact that I personally found that you've got to have this sort of emotional maturity, because in our industry, you need to be fairly thick-skinned. You're dealing with owners. There are some people who are greedy. There are some people who are going to try and stab you in the back in some of these corporate environments. There are guests who can be unreasonable. I think emotional maturity is also a factor. Do you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely, and not only do you need to be resilient to that, but you also need to be culturally sensitive, particularly to your employees, especially in a diverse work environment where you may have up to 25 different nationalities in your workforce. Each of them have different cultural sensitivities that you need to be
Mm,
emotionally aware of as well.
yeah. Do you ever get interns, or do you take on people to do kind of cross exposure or internships in your properties?
We do. We would take on internships here. Again, just being so remote, it is hard to find interns that would want to probably commit to such a
Yeah,
remote environment. I
yeah.
do find a lot of the interns would sort of tend to normally lean towards more of a city based lifestyle where
Mm.
there is maybe more sort of city stimulation as such. I think you've got to be really passionate and understanding when you come to a remote town like this,
Mm.
because you
Mm.
are sort of sometimes left without the creature comforts of what many people may be used to living in a city.
But then again, you'd probably get the opportunity to get exposed to many, many different areas of the property, right? Rather than just being shoved into one department if you were in a big city property.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the beauty of this resort is, given it's only 68 rooms, we do have a number of staff already that are able to adapt and evolve and work within food and beverage, within housekeeping, and particularly those that show sort of you know a degree of high communication and a particular sort of attitude towards a high level of service. We can look at integrating them to the front desk as well.
Well, that's brilliant. Well, look, just to sort of round off, Tristan, thank you so much for your time, and it's been a really rich discussion. We've covered a lot of different areas. Um, what's the best way for our listeners to learn more about manta rays or connect with you?
Thank you, Richard. I'd say the easiest way to follow our journey that the property is on, especially considering it's just gone under new ownership in the last 2 months, would just be through Instagram via Manta Rays Ningaloo as
Okay,
our Instagram handle.
brilliant. Okay, I'll make sure that that gets mentioned, and we'll put that in the link of the description. Meanwhile, I'll be happy to forward you some more information about Cresswell Attire, and my friend Mark Russell, who's doing these amazing things with the sustainable uniforms, and send you the link. You can have a look. I mean, they do actually have a site there where you can buy direct without having to have it designed. But if you want to have it designed, like I said, they can key in all your brand DNA, and they can produce something bespoke for you. Anyway, I'll be happy to forward that on to you. But once again, Tristan, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure to chat with you, and I'll let you know when the link is ready and up. Okay, thank
Fa-
you very
fa-
much.
Fantastic, Richard. Thank you very much for your time, and great to be in touch with you as well.
All right, Tristan, thank you.